Okay, good. Thank you. Welcome to Megamind podcast, episode 7. In today's episode, we're going to talk about cloud security. And today's guest is Andrew. So, yes, Andrew, welcome to Megamind podcast. So, tell us about yourself.
So my name is Andrew Gatsi, a third year cybersecurity student at NAST. I'm a cybersecurity enthusiast, a CTF player, somebody who is interested and invested in technology, somebody who always tries to check at security and the aspects that involve security in the digital cyberspace. So this is my final year at university, and I'm also in the industry.
Oh, okay. Very good. So, out of all the fields, why did you decide to do cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity has been a very interesting field for me ever since I was in primary school. So the first laptop that I ever got was running Linux. I never knew at that time that it was Linux. And since I was somebody that was not used to laptops, I didn't know how to use laptops. I didn't know, operating systems, the functionalities. So I took the opportunity to search online on how to use the operating system that I got on my laptop. And with that, I was introduced to a lot of Linux concepts on YouTube, on the internet, on Google. And by the time I reached high school, I realized that, I'm actually ahead in terms of, cybersecurity, actually in terms of Linux. And I was also very invested in it since, it gave me a different view of looking at technology and of looking at the world. And looking at it now, it was very interesting and it was a huge opportunity. It was something that I was not expecting. And by the time I realized that, what I was using was Linux, I was already invested in it. I was sort of like addicted to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's your understanding of cloud?
Cloud is running applications, software, resources on the internet. So you've got processing power, storage, VMwares, virtual machines. You've got a lot of things that are being run. So a lot of computing resources that are being run on the internet. So instead of running them locally on your services, on your servers, or using your resources, you're running them from online, from the internet.
Okay, so now when you're saying the internet, does it mean like it's on top there, like server hanging in the sky, or how does it work?
No, we have got what we call cloud providers. So these are companies or individuals that offer services to people or to organizations, and then you as an organization or as a person, you use these services on the internet. So they are freely accessible on the internet.
So what you mean is like it's just accessing computer resources via the internet. So it's just a device that is sitting at someone's premise or someone's office or a company, and you're just accessing via internet.
Yeah.
Okay. So now when it comes to cybersecurity, what are the challenges one can face when it comes to cloud security?
When it comes to cybersecurity and when it comes to cloud security, when it comes to cloud, you have got data that's being put online on the internet, and with this data that's being put online, you have got malicious actors. So these are people that are looking to make a profit or looking to have a ransom with this data. So these people want to have access to this data, and most of the time, misconfigurations can happen with these cloud services, and these malicious actors can have access to this data. And when they have access to this data, it can lead to a lot of trouble, data integrity is violated, the availability information is violated, and this data can also be sold on the dark web, on the dark markets where data is sold, and a lot of people's information can be exposed to third parties that were not supposed to have access to this information.
Okay. So what can companies or individuals do when, to protect the data that is on the cloud?
Okay, so the first thing that companies or individuals have to understand when it comes to cloud is that this is a shared responsibility. So what you have is the cloud providers. These cloud providers are providing you with the services and they are responsible for securing those services. But then you as a person or you as an organization, you are responsible for making sure that your data, your configurations and your applications are also secure. Because it doesn't make sense that I get cloud services from you, and then me as an individual, I'm not securing those cloud services, so I'm hosting them on public networks. So it doesn't make sense. So as an individual, you have to understand that cloud services or the entire concept of cloud is a shared responsibility between the cloud service provider and you as an individual.
But you see, when it comes to cloud, you have like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and now you also hear like cybersecurity as a service or code as a service. So now, infrastructure as a service, I do get that the service providers, they're just giving the asset, so it's up to you to configure, to put all the configurations there. So meaning in terms of security as well, it's sitting with you as a customer. Now, opposed to you going to software as a service, whereby it's the vendor who's applying all the configurations, all the security features. So if I'm using software as a service, how can I still protect my information, knowing that I don't have access to the infrastructure itself for me to configure it the way I want?
Okay, so the cloud service providers, they offer tools to monitor who has access. So you have to realize that there's the concept of identity and access management. So you have the control of who has access to your resources, who has control, who can view. And you can also see in real time, what is this person doing with my resources, or who has access to these resources. So you as an individual, you have access to who can control these resources or your infrastructure. So you've got users, let's say you're an organization and you've got users that have access to these resources. You as an organization, you can monitor who has access to this and at what time they've got access to this, and you can also restrict what access they have to this infrastructure and to these resources. So there's the concept of least privileges, whereby you give an individual or an organization just the bare minimum privileges they need to complete a task using your resources. So instead of giving a person, let's say, root privileges to infrastructure, whereby they have got control over everything, you just give them specific privileges that they need in order to finish their tasks, or in order the specific privileges they need in order to finish that specific assessment or specific task that they need to complete.
So now you mentioned identity access management. So how does identity access management enhance the security on the cloud?
This allows you as an individual to have control. So let's say you are a cloud service provider, I'm an organization, and I have got my people that are working with me. I have control over who can access what. So I can give limited access to whichever person in my organization, and I can also see what they're accessing from which environment they're accessing. So let's say
and I think on that, I'll say, what about impersonations? What if someone has spoofed your identity? So how is it going to make sure that the person that is accessing the platform is really the one who's claiming to be?
Alright, when it comes to that, there's multi-factor authentication methods that can be used. So in addition to the passwords, there can be multi-factor authentication methods, applications that can be used to identify that the correct person is having access to this. So let's say a person has access to my cloud infrastructure, they put in their correct password, they would be required to add additional information or to additional codes that are generated, let's say from third parties or from other multi-factor authentication methods to verify that this is the correct person having access to the correct information at the correct location.
But you see, what I've seen is a challenge as well is that while you apply your multi-factor authentication, you need to also assess them to see which one is much easier to bypass. Things such as like OTPs can easily be bypassed. So now, what I've seen with the late, what was the guy's name? Kevin Mitnick. What he demonstrated how one can bypass even like your access to your cloud environment. So even though you have like multi-factor authentication, you can bypass that using things such as USB Ninja. So it takes the whole session to the attacker side. So it's still logged in as you. So it's very difficult to really make sure that your data is secure out there, but there's a need for us to always make sure that we know the platform where we are putting our data, who's having access to the data, always monitor that and make sure that you put at least some basic security so you can eliminate some of the script kiddies. I don't know what you can tell us about script kiddies.
There's a lot of cybersecurity tools that are available out there. So I was actually shocked that in one of the Linux operating systems, Kali Linux, there's so many tools that you don't need to have knowledge of how to use them. So you just choose option like option 1, how to hack into a Wi-Fi network. You just choose option 1, and then it asks you which network you want to hack, option 2. So there are script kiddies that have access to these operating systems. They don't need to have a lot of knowledge or programming or coding skills. they just have this operating system, and then they have access to so much power. I would say so much power because you know with such tools, yeah, you have access to something that is very, very, like long ago it was a very different story because it was difficult, to hack into a network. But then nowadays with these tools, you just press 1, 2, you already have access to the network.
Correct.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a guy that was using Metasploit, and they thought like he was a hacker because he could use Metasploit. Yeah. And I was like, there's still a lot that you have to learn. Whoever that explained to you hacking or cybersecurity needs to come and apologize.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more. Yeah. So now, what are the security measures one can put on cloud environment? I've heard people talking about encryption. Right. So how can encryption assist you in hardening your cloud infrastructure?
Okay, so these cloud service providers, sometimes they offer encryption tools to automate encryption. So encryption helps in such a way that data that's being transferred between the end side and then the receiving side, it's not in a readable format. So let's say now there's a hacker or a malicious actor that's sitting in the middle, so obviously monitoring this data that's being transferred between the cloud service provider and then the organization itself. When data is encrypted now, it makes it very difficult for these malicious actors just to read that data just like that. So it makes it very difficult for them to have access to the plain text that would have been, easily accessible if it wasn't encrypted. So encryption from the cloud service providers, and then there's also third-party tools that can be used to encrypt this data, allowing for it to be in an unreadable format when it's being in transit. And then at the end, when you're receiving this data, it gets unencrypted or decrypted, and then you've got your plain text. So in the middle, when it's being transferred, it's encrypted.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that it's important to encrypt data in transit and at rest.
Absolutely.
So in transit when it's leaving one point to another, and at rest wherever it's sitting,
exactly,
should also be encrypted.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's very good. And you mentioned being in the middle. There's an attack referred to something in the middle. What's that?
There is a man in the middle attack.
So what can you tell us about it?
So let's say okay, so obviously when you're searching for information or when you're having access to the internet, what malicious actors can do is that, they can sit in the middle, whereby they set softwares or they can create codes whereby, they have access to the data where it's coming from, let's say from a data source. So they intercept this data from the data source, and then they can modify this data, or they can intercept this data, have access to the data, read everything that's being sent between the data source and you, or from you to the data source. So they sit in the middle, they check this data, they monitor this data, they intercept this data. They have the privilege to modify this data. They have the privilege to change this data. So let's say now you as the person, you are signing in into a page, or you are logging into a page. As a person or as a malicious actor, I can intercept this data or the traffic that's coming from your computer or to the data source, and then I can modify this data, or I can have access to your passwords that you are, putting into these services or these platforms. Yeah. So as a person or as a man in the middle malicious actor, I've got access to all this information that's traveling between you as the person and where the data is going to. So the data source. So
one method maybe to mitigate man in the middle. You can tell us one
encryption. Encryption. I strongly suggest encryption because now even if this person is in the middle intercepting this data and the data is encrypted, it will make it very difficult for them to read this data
to understand what
you're trying to say. Because you as the person, the data is encrypted. So encryption makes it very, very difficult for them to read it. Plus also, if it was in plain text, or if this data was not encrypted, it's like you're just spoon feeding me your information.
Yes,
your passwords, your usernames, your credentials, you're just spoon feeding me this information. So when it's encrypted, it's very difficult for them to understand it.
Okay. Yeah. I also heard that things such as access control lists are important when it comes to access to information or access to your data. Right. So can you tell us more about access control lists? Okay, so the access control list, what you have is a network access control list. So these they monitor or they check data that's being on your network. They monitor data, and then also they also let you see the activities that is happening on the network. So the events, the activities, the logs, or like who has access to your network, who is viewing your network, who is using your network for what specific reasons. So you having access or you having the privilege to see who has all this access to your network, it allows you now to take the appropriate measures
to mitigate such instances. So access control list makes it possible for you as an individual or as an organization to have to view, or let's say, the logs or who has access to your network, and then also to take appropriate measures to mitigate unauthorized access.
Okay, so what you are saying is that with your access control list, you are able to tell, okay, fine, there's user A, this is the access I'm going to grant to this person.
Right.
User B, I will grant them a different access. So things such as like your role-based access control. So I'm giving you access based on your role.
Exactly.
You also have things such as like your role-based.
Yeah.
So more of like if statement, if this, then this.
Right.
Also like your mandatory access control,
Right.
where you always just get that that access no matter what.
Right.
You always get that.
Right.
Now the one that I'm not really a fan of is like the discretionary access control, whereby access is based on the subject owner. So you can feel today to give you root access against you, the next day it changes.
Exactly.
Now I think the best of the access controls comes to attribute-based access control.
Right.
So the access is based on few attributes, which can be like the location where the person is connecting. So especially on cloud, you can say, yes, we have a cloud infrastructure that is maybe exposed to the internet and all that to almost everyone, but we can limit who can reach the platform itself. You need to be from Namibia, because we can easily reach the service providers and to kind of pinpoint to who is this person that launched the attack, then opening it to the entire world. So I think attribute-based access control is very good, and I've seen it also with Gmail. So if you try to log into Gmail, let's say now from Windhoek, it picks your location, you are like in Windhoek, and the next minute you share your credentials with someone who's like in Walvis Bay, you're gonna report it as someone they've signed in and all that, because they assume that as a person it's impossible for you to be in Windhoek at, let's say, 1 o'clock, and the next minute to find yourself in Walvis Bay. By no means you will be able to do that. So I think those features just comes in and compensate on any failures that you have on the cloud security. I don't know what's your view.
In addition to that, actually, access control, it allows you, to give access. Sometimes I was actually doing this cybersecurity challenge whereby you have got a user that's has access on a system, and then you're supposed to get the credentials of this user. This user has regular permissions or has regular privileges, but then you're supposed to get root privileges using this user. So with access control, actually, it's important, but it's also a bit risky in terms of if the right access controls aren't given to a specific user, it might end up compromising the security of an organization. So you might end up with a regular user like me who has access to something that's not supposed to be given to me. So malicious actors can use me now as an entry point to access this information. So access control can be useful when correctly implemented, but then it can also be a security issue if not implemented correctly.
So one thing I always tell people is that it's important to classify your data, so which we refer as data classification. But again, your people need to classify them, because if you don't classify them, you might, as you're saying, you might end up giving wrong privileges. So it's like giving a gun to the wrong person. So you must really make sure that you're giving to the correct person. Now, in terms of SIEM, what can you tell us when it comes to cloud? So, okay, cool. So, as you mentioned that the GDPR, so which is the General Data Protection Regulation with Europe. So now, as Africa, what are we really having to impose also on other nations that they need to protect our African data? So I think that's something that as Africa we also need to start considering, because now regulations that we have are more like isolation. So we have like a POPI Act in SA. So just that's only for South Africa, but we should also have something that looks after Africa itself in general. So so I think there's quite a lot you can do in that line with compliance or regulations. There's a tool, there's a platform called Rata. I love that platform so much because it makes it easier for you to do your compliance in real time and in a technical way. Most of the times compliance or audit, they use checklist. So which is more of like a traditional way of doing things. So you're coming to ask the person, do you have this, do you have this? But now the tool itself can monitor the traffic. So based on, let's say, GDPR, so you have like keywords. If it picks like maybe Europeans' names or passport numbers and all that, it picks that you are dealing with European data, and you might be having issues because maybe let's say clause A, B, C, D is saying this and that's not what you're actually applying.
Right.
So such tools helps you to be steps ahead when it comes to your compliance. But if you're just relying to the traditional ways, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
And I've seen as well with Wazoo. Wazoo also has a compliance module.
Yeah.
So you can also see, I think they have I've seen like they have like a NIST. There's a NIST,
Yeah.
like there's a CIS control.
Yeah.
So such open source tools can also help you to at least narrow your exposure.
Yeah, so also if you're checking at most of the cloud service providers, they offer tools that can also, help with the compliance issues. And then also what I'm hoping for is that, especially with the age of AI, is that, measures are going to be taken whereby, we can implement AI automation, to just check at compliance, to check if, our resources or our data is complying with the regulations.
Yeah. So in now the other challenge that I have is when it comes to data breaches. How do you guarantee that your customers' data is safe, knowing that you don't have control of infrastructure where where your customers' data is sitting? So we have seen like with the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So if you're hosting your data in Russia,
Right.
the sanctions that you'll get will be very huge.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot that needs to be done, and again, you can have your data locked in that country where they can decide not to give it to you.
Yeah, exactly.
So what can you do when it comes to such challenges that you have with like data breaches, like vendor lock-in as well, because you're using, let's say Microsoft wants you to end up using everything just to be Microsoft.
Right, yeah.
So what can you do there?
Okay, so with data breaches, that is actually a very good topic. Mostly, when it comes to data breaches, I mean vulnerabilities in softwares, vulnerabilities in the infrastructure that you're using, misconfigurations. Some of these issues cause, data breaches, or, the fact that, what you said, like the war in Ukraine, whereby, maybe your data is locked and you don't have access to that data, or, misconfigurations or whatever. What mitigation strategies that we can use, to counteract these situations? For me, mostly, I always suggest that, we do security auditing, we do vulnerability assessments on the infrastructure that you are using, and then you also keep backups of the data that you have. So you've got data that's here, but then you also want to keep backups of that data in a secured and, private environment where you know that, okay, this data is secure. If this one is breached, or if this data, is locked, let's say by ransomware actors or threat actors, you've got backups to run back to, and you also make sure that, okay, this data that you have for the customers or for, the organization employees, it's also encrypted in this location, so that even if, this data is breached, I mean, there's less that the malicious actors can do because this data is encrypted, and also you've got somewhere to run back to, and to get a backup of that data and information.
So actually, what you're saying is that encryption is very key in this. So we have to make sure that our data is always encrypted.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So now we also hear about hybrid cloud. So where you can use your public and your private. So what are the challenges that you find when it comes to hybrid cloud?
Okay, so when it comes to this now, this is where the security measures need to be strongly monitored and strongly, checked, because, you've got public, whereby, your data is being, anybody can access your data, and then you've got private, whereby only you have access to that, private data, but then you can also control who has access to that data. So we need to implement policies whereby, you control who has access to what data. So I am a person, I have no, okay, so let's say I'm an individual, I'm your customer, I want to have specific access to your data, just specific data. You can control what data I have access to, and also what control I have over that data. So instead of giving me full control over that entire data, you just give me specific control.
And I think also where the data is residing, you also need to look at the measures that you're applying there.
Right.
Because sometimes you might say, okay, fine, you have like two servers. Maybe one is maybe exposing people just to whatever that is public, and the other one is what's private. But if you think of things such as like hopping, like when you talk about, let's say, villain hopping. So once one server is compromised, nothing prevents the girl from trying to discover what else is in this network. So that might lead to them also compromising the other systems and having access to whatever that was private. So there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done. And before you go into a cloud into a cloud project, I think there's a lot of assessment, a lot of security considerations that one have to put in place, not rushing. Looking at the vendor's reputation means a lot. Looking at the responsibilities of that vendor in terms of cyber security and what are your responsibilities. Do you also have a team that is ready to look after those platforms, to assess as well as platforms? Because vendors will always come and tell you that we are 100% secure, we are 99% secure. But again, our truth is that. So we should not really give that responsibility to the cloud service providers. And again, as they always say, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So yes, I don't know if you have anything to tell viewers.
In regards to that also, you can do what we call segmentation, whereby, let's say on a network, only specific individuals are allowed to have access over something, and then some specific individuals are allowed to have access over something. So this segmentation allows you as an organization or as an individual to say that, okay, if this side of the network is compromised, nothing from this side is affected. So it's like, how can I best put this? So you've got, let's say, data that's here on this phone, and then I've got data that's here on this device. So segmentation allows you to put, let's say, a border here, so that if this is compromised, there's at least a firewall in between here to protect this kind of data from this compromisation.
So it's very important, as you're saying, like to segregate also your network, segregate your resources, make sure that if one part is compromised, not everything else is compromised. And again, monitoring is very key. I always tell people that visibility is like the biggest thing in security. You can only protect what you have control over, what you see. It's like you having a bodyguard who's blind. It's not going to help you much. So visibility is so important for you to apply the securities. And the security should also be based on the asset that you're protecting. So once you can identify your assets, you can do proper assessment, then I think you can start putting the different controls that are required for those platforms. So yes, anything you want to tell our viewers?
Security and cyber security in this age of artificial intelligence, I always say that cyber security and security of data itself is very crucial, because as an individual, I don't need to have a lot of knowledge, in order to compromise data. I can just go to to artificial intelligence platforms, ChatGPT, Cloud AI, and then I can, ask it to generate some scripts or malware, to compromise.
Or just tell you platforms that you can use for you to launch for your attacks.
Exactly. So, with access to these scripts or software tools that are open source, it's so easy to compromise organizations. I mean, there's a lot of script kiddies, a lot of people that have not a lot of knowledge in the cybersecurity world that are doing illegal stuff, that are doing malicious stuff. So cybersecurity, penetration testing, security assessments, these are very crucial aspects in this age of artificial intelligence, and it's always good that you know where your organization or where your company or you as an individual stand, because data, it's the new currency right now. It's the new currency. So if your data is compromised, if your data is falling out into the wrong hands, you'll be in trouble, because malicious actors, they are not sleeping.
And again, your data can also be used by your competitors as a competitive advantage. So it's very important for us to secure our data. So thank you, Andrew, for coming. Hope to host you in the near future. Thank you.